Welcome, Chosen X. You wake before dawn with a small electric clarity that steadies the air around you. The city is not yet awake and you move through the quiet like someone carrying a secret map. Your body signals in ways that doctors cannot measure. That sensation in your stomach is not random. It announces a doorway aligning inside you, a receptor tuning toward currents most cannot perceive. Where others sleep, you become alert, attentive to the currents that shift the unseen. In those thin hours you learn to listen differently. A low hum settles through your ribs and you translate it into meaning. A dream is not only a picture but an instruction. A restless night yields a pattern that threads into morning choices. You begin cataloging sensations, each sensation labeled with care, the tightening at the base of your sternum that precedes sudden goodbyes, the faint metallic aftertaste that signals an approaching untruth, the coolness along your spine that prefaces someone finding their voice across an ocean. You do not wear these talents like armor. Instead you move among people as one who keeps a lighthouse lit. When a neighbor passes with a burden they cannot name, you feel a subtle drag at the center of your being and your hands know how to offer space without words. You have a discipline based on humility. You do not announce, you receive. That is your craft. Over time you notice cycles. Some nights the heaviness is brief and tender. Other nights it arrives like an ocean. Moon phases and storms, mass sorrows and private griefs become part of the pattern. The world hums and your body answers. You trace these rhythms in a small ledger where ink meets intuition. Each entry becomes a coordinate on a growing map that points to work beyond domestic concerns. Long ago someone told you metaphors about thin skins and sensitive souls and you smiled with both affection and frustration. Labels never fit. Your interior life is less about fragility and more about permeability. The membrane between what is visible and what is sacred opens for you. It is not a curse. It is tasking. Each flare of illness is a signal, or recalibration, or refining. You begin simple rituals to honor the process. Warm water beside the bed. Fingers pressed to pulse points. Quiet phrases that steady the nervous system. You discover that intention steadies the tremors. Breath becomes the language that aligns you with purpose. Sitting still becomes a profession of attention. You learn to inhabit discomfort and let it translate rather than consume. Visions arrive like weather reports. Sometimes they are gentle images, an old tree bending toward light, a child laughing where there was sorrow. Sometimes they are urgent, flames swallowing a distant building, a voice cracking with sorrow in a place you have never visited. When these impressions unfold later as news or chance meetings, you no longer call them accidents. You mark them as confirmation. Around you people oscillate between curiosity and fear. Some seek you because being near you is like stepping into a room where the air has been cleaned. Others dismiss you as eccentric. You are practiced in receiving both responses with equal tenderness. Judgment does not alter the call. It only clarifies who will hear and who will look away. In time you encounter a silence that is not empty. It is inhabited by a presence that does not speak through syllables but through alignment. In that presence you feel a lineage press behind your shoulders as if ancestors lean in to steady you. You are both vessel and passage. The sensations become less chaotic and more articulate. Each ache specifies a direction. You begin to perform small acts that feel like translation. A palm on a shoulder. A breathing exercise offered to someone mid-collapse. A presence that allows tears to unfurl without explanation. People leave these encounters lighter. You do not perform miracles. You provide a witness that restores permission to feel. There are tests. Occasionally the currents that come to you are corrosive. You must learn discernment. Not every shiver is sacred. Not every nausea carries meaning. You calibrate by asking for resonance. You learn to sense whether an impression carries warmth or chill. That is the education of patience. One dawn, after many such calibrations, a different stillness arrives. The weight that used to settle into your abdomen now becomes a glow that pools beneath your breastbone. It is not fire consuming you. It is warmth wiring you into a new frequency. In that hour you feel invited to step forward in service that blooms beyond the personal to the communal. You stand at the window and watch light crown the horizon. There is no proclamation. Only a soft rearrangement within. You place a pen on paper and write words that feel less like composition and more like release. The ledger is no longer simple evidence. It is a map of gates passed and rooms entered. You name your work as translating thresholds. Receive what comes. You wake in the small hours to a call that sits in your chest like a folded map. The house breathes softly and you move through familiar rooms as if discovering joints and seams in your own skeleton. Pressure gathers beneath your sternum and instead of fleeing you hold still. Your palms rest on your knees and you listen to the body's grammar. It has learned to speak in shivers and pitches and you have learned to translate. Images arrive less like dreams and more like coordinates. You see a field threaded with a city at the rim. Stones ring a circle that remembers footsteps. A child stands in the center like a knot in a net. The feeling in your belly answers like a tuning fork. You name the impression and mark its edges in a notebook you keep for such things. You move through small rituals to align. Tea is prepared though your hand does not need heat. A spoon is set down with the precision of someone arranging a map. These acts are not superstition but precision. You become careful with motion. Humility replaces showiness. In public you are still often misread as fragile or fanciful, but you have stopped caring for labels. People pass you bearing compressed stories. A friend arrives with sorrow pressed behind a smile. A stranger moves with a secret joy that flutters like a caged bird. Your senses catch after images of choice and consequence. In a market you press fingertips to an old book and receive the taste of salt in a room where hands are clasped. The impressions stack like ledgers. You catalog them with the devotion of a librarian. Cycles follow patterns not of clocks but of tides. Encounters arrive on the backs of eclipses on the quiet breath of a city at dawn on a news item that moves through the world like a stone through water. You map smells to tones the moment a bird calls. Pencil entries fill your notebook and erasure remains possible because you understand transience. On an ordinary walk you find yourself before a weathered house and a woman on its porch. Her jaw tightens and the way decisions harden. You sense the ripple of a choice that will reroute lives. Your throat tightens and you feel the pull to speak to warn. You do not, but your presence offers a place where the decision can land with less violence. Presence is sometimes a verb of stillness. You learn to hold thresholds so others may pass without fracturing. You stand beside fevered children offering calm like a pole of steadiness. You do not mend in the way a doctor does, yet people leave your space lighter. You have become a container where truths can settle. Over time the discomfort reshapes. Calibration replaces assault. Your nervous system stretches and learns new tolerances. You hum beneath your breath like a musician practicing scales, and others call your gaze steadier. You do not correct them because remembering shows on the face. There are nights saturated with ancient sorrow that press into your ribs. You do not appropriate those stories, but you make room and let them cycle. On mornings after heavy nights you press forehead to floorboards and feel household responses in small creaks. The tides within you turn and eventually ease. An object arrives at your threshold, a small framed shard of glass set in tarnished metal. Within it a landscape preserved in amber refracts something you cannot name. The artifact reminds you that threads pass beyond this moment. You cradle the small piece as one cradles a vow. A traveling elder comes wearing worn shoes and speaks in stories. He offers a single directive: cultivate a horizon in your chest. You practice by inventorying what is yours and what passes through you. The drill is simple and severe. Distinction clears the channel and preserves empathy. You learn when to act and when to wait. Action void of humility unravels. When you move, it is to be useful, quietly precise, and without a claim to credit. Humility tastes like iron and rain, and it anchors choices, making them truer. One evening beneath a street lamp you watch a moth circle insistently, and you think of persistence and surrender as two hands holding then releasing. The image guides you. You map routes no one else charts and you follow with caution and curiosity. A dream surfaces with a name you have not yet spoken. You write it down in pencil, fingers trembling not with fear but recognition. The syllables will be a key but not now. For now you continue the work of attending, translating the subtle into acts that hold weight where light falls. You have accepted the call, and in acceptance you find a steadiness deeper than before. The world remains heavy and beautiful and sometimes cruel. You remain present as a place of reception and translation. The calling endures and you keep moving forward. Each dawn becomes a quiet rite. You gather fragments others have left behind and steady them with a single breath. You move forward with hands open and careful because the life you carry is service and the path asks for tender courage. Stay gentle. You awaken before dawn with a thin knowing coiled beneath your ribs. The town breathes like an animal at rest and you have become its listening instrument. A pressure at the base of your throat becomes a map. A cold ripple across your palm names a sorrow in a house you have never entered. Your mornings are practice for attention. You cultivate small disciplines to keep the noise intelligible. You sip water with intention. You set a bowl of salt on the sill. You draw tiny signs in a ledger not to summon but to remember. These modest acts are static so visions arrive as letters rather than storms. In time you judge whether a message needs immediate tending or patient waiting. Neighbors sense the difference. A baker lingers to tell a dream. Children offer trinkets with solemn trust. People come without demanding answers. They sit in the quiet and find their sorrow held. You do not fix what happens. You create a room where grief can unfold. Not every visitation brings consolation. Market day a man collapses by crates of oranges. His skin turns the pale of paper and your chest answers with an image of an old debt and an apology withheld. You hold his hand and breathe with him until help arrives. News later confirms what you knew. You keep such moments private. The work asks you to balance ordinary demands with unexpected transmission. Bills must be paid. Errands insist. You fold the messages into hours like letters into envelopes. Sometimes the transmissions are clinical and exact. Sometimes they arrive like a child letting a secret out at play and leave you laughing and weeping together. Signs begin to repeat. A wind smelling faintly of rosemary forewarns choice. A blue shimmer at the periphery signals opening. A low metallic chord in your teeth warns of endings. You sketch these symbols and margins and test them with small experiments. Tools form from patterns, not dogma. Doubt sits a lamp at your bedside and you examine it. To test yourself you set intentions and observe whether events mirror them. You pose questions to strangers through small gestures and wait for echoes. Rigor teaches patience. A trial arrives when the usual murmur tightens into a knot. The dry fountain in the square seems to sigh. A lantern will not hold flame. You stand barefoot on cobbles and let the earth press messages into your soles. The discomfort that rises is not punishment but direction. You choose to answer. You might have kept this work private as a sealed secret. Instead you open a narrow door. It is not a spectacle. It is tea, a chair, an hour without an agenda. People appear carrying all manner of stories. Some bring ancient sorrow. Others sudden joy. Each meeting teaches you containment. Metaphor becomes conversation. You describe sorrow as a river that forgets its banks and returns only when shown a map. Joy becomes an old bell that rings once and reminds the ear of a pattern. Images translate what doctrine cannot touch. You teach without commands. Resistance grows. Some label you fragile. Authorities propose tests and forms. Competing leaders demand demonstrations. You refuse to be reduced. You keep practice both wild and disciplined. One night the river calls with a grief that will not be left on its banks. You stand in shallow water with 3 strangers gathered along your path. The current speaks of a memory untended. You teach a simple ritual to hold remembrance at home. The act spreads like a hinge. Families begin to sit with unsaid narratives and the town loosens. Carrying memory requires forms. You craft household practices, name the lost by lamp, set a cup to collect stories, speak a name aloud once a week. These small things alter rhythms and open space for tenderness. Your body remains an instrument and sign. You answer each ache with inquiry and breath. The town sends sorrow and you return scaffolding for mourning. The exchange generates repair. A community forms not by decree but by invitation. People come to learn presence. Children learn to take a small breath when the world tightens. Elders relearn storytelling without premature closure. Thresholds become visible. Conflicts surface. Jealousies and old wounds reopen. You intervene to hold space rather than judge. Repair demands silence, constancy, and the slow labor of trust building. Your ledger thickens. Entries begin in sensation and move toward consequence. This practice guards against hubris. Dreams arrive in sequences and repeating figures act as teachers. You read them as guidance about obligation and limits. The lesson of this movement is clear. Your task is not to erase suffering but to create vessels where it may be witnessed and named. You are not a savior. You are a steward keeping a light that allows passage. This stewardship prepares you for trials beyond the next horizon. You spend hours refining small rituals and tuning your attention until your hands learn the languages of departure and return. Each practice steadies you and readies your passage. Night leans close and you move like someone remembering how to breathe underwater. You have grown adept at lowering the volume of thought so a subtler channel can be heard. What once felt abrupt now registers as a gentle protocol you have learned to follow. Reception is not a spectacle. It is discipline. You attend with patience and your body replies with steady signals. Small calibrations guide your choices. A tightness at the base of the throat might map a neighbor's regret. A pleasant shiver along your forearm could mean a distant reconciliation is about to unfold. You keep a ledger of these correspondences but you do not record them for glory. You record them to refine the instrument that is your attention. Refinement becomes a daily craft rather than a miraculous occurrence. People find you when they can no longer carry their private weather. They arrive without fanfare and leave lighter. You have stopped promising cures. Instead you offer an oriented presence. Your hands learn to translate pressure. Your silence learns to open space where speech has only raised sediment. You become a conduit through which complexity can simplify into next steps. One evening an arrangement reaches you that is unusually dense. Several threads converge under a single signature and the texture of the field feels like coal pressed into a palm. You do not flinch. You breathe into the pressure and invite consent. The response you receive is a soft aligning, not a command but a negotiation. You step forward only as far as permission allows and the thresholds answer with light. Permission creates a corridor. Through that corridor you glimpse fragments of lives that must be tended. A child's fear that has weathered into adulthood. A sorrow so old it has become a family shape. An unfinished apology lodged like a pebble in someone's throat. You approach each fragment like an archaeologist who treats relics with care. Excavation here is metaphor but also literal. You coax stories from the places where people have hardened. There are tests. Offers come wrapped in convincing cadence. They promise ease in exchange for surrender. You feel the invitation as a numbness creeping along the limbs, an anesthetic over the very sensitivities you were taught to trust. You decline by re-establishing contact with the small practices that ground you. Breath. Alignment with the spine. A tiny prayer of permission. The refusal is not dramatic. It is a quiet fidelity that accumulates into a life. Rest becomes sacred. You cannot pour from an emptied vessel. You schedule pauses as though they were rites. During these pauses you practice simple attentions with domestic detail. The water warmed and sipped slowly. A towel folded with gratitude. Music held to one ear like a call. These small acts do the heavy work of replenishment so the larger tasks remain sustainable. A stranger places a folded note at your threshold describing a junction where sorrow and hope cross. The handwriting carries a cadence you recognize because it mirrors patterns you have been following. Someone else has been mapping the same terrain and has invited you to meet. You accept with the same modesty you bring to everything. There is no triumph in your acceptance, only a readiness to be useful. At the meeting you find others who have been attending to similar signatures. Their methods differ. Their vocabularies vary. Still your presence weaves into the group like a rhythmic thread. You find that multiplicity dilates the available language. Together you form a practice that is both larger and more tender than anything any of you had managed alone. The work that follows feels like passing a river stone hand to hand. Each person offers a different maneuver. Some listen. Some hold light with steady attention. Some invent small rituals that slow the chaos. You contribute what you have preserved, the art of translating microsignals into compassionate responses. The collaboration does not erase pain, but it makes pain carryable. There are nights when the field pushes back. The resistance seems not malicious but simply dense and unwilling to be known. You sit with it anyway. You practice the patient ritual of witnessing without fixing. You watch the tide of feeling move through and you do not try to divert it prematurely. When you allow movement instead of contorting outcomes, you notice changes that had been impossible under pressure. Children begin to arrive with simple questions that are not small. They ask about fear and belonging with the bluntness that only early speech allows. You listen, and in the listening you discover patterns that adults had trained themselves to overlook. The children's questions simplify complexity into openings. Their clarity becomes a resource. Over time you teach small techniques to those who show genuine willingness. You do not advertise. You are invited. You ask for consent before any instruction begins. The practices you pass on are mundane enough to be vital. You stand in the final chamber of a long apprenticeship realized in the small hours. Night holds its breath as if to hear what you will say. You are steadier now. The ache that once announced dread has learned to speak in meaning. Each subtle tremor is a signal, not a sentence, and you have become fluent in that quiet language. The work has not been spectacular. It has been practice. You learned to translate the shiver behind the rib into a geography of need. You practiced asking permission of the inner weather of others and found that consent is a form of grace. You do not rescue. You make room. This discipline has reshaped the shape of your days. Visions that once arrived as puzzles now arrive as textures you can touch. You feel the weight of an unspoken apology in a passerby and know which corner of a memory needs light. You sense before dawn when a household will tilt toward grief and arrive with nothing but the steady presence of listening. Your body has become a ledger of soft transactions between the seen and the unseen. Power has revealed itself as fidelity. It asks for patience rather than haste. You hold no vanity about the gifts you carry. You hold them like glass, careful and open to reflection. People come not to be fixed but to be witnessed, and in that witnessing they find a first breath that had been kept small for too long. There are evenings that test you. The ache sharpens, doubt leans in, and your chest feels like winter. Those are the hours you have learned to sit with a simple liturgy of breath and return to the place where tenderness meets truth. Suffering is not a verdict here but a doorway, and your steadiness is the key that lets passage happen without harm. Small mercies become the curriculum for larger openings. A returned letter, a quiet forgiveness, a rain that pauses for reconciliation, these are the scaffolds of transformation. You begin to see salvation in the ordinary and honor it the way one honors a campfire kept safe for travelers. Your presence draws people who have been taught to hide. They come with pockets full of unsaid things. You do not offer explanations that cling. You offer room and a mirror that does not judge. In your silence they find vocabulary. In your steadiness they discover trust. You have learned that healing often arrives not through words but through the permission to unfold. Throughout this season your senses deepen. You read the mood of a room as a map. A tightened jaw is an island to approach slowly. A distracted hand is a thread leading to a wound that needs reweaving. You learn to translate bodily weather into practical kindness, and your interventions are small acts performed with fierce tenderness. At length a new summons arrives in the form of a glowing rectangle. It promises not a spectacle but a meeting. The screen will gather voices and faces that cannot come to you and carry them into the pattern you already embody. The image will be made of care and clarity and will contain a continuation of the instruction you have been given slowly in the dark. This moving image is an extension of the same work. When you press play, you do not consume content. You step into a shared breath that passes along a further key. That field will offer teaching in the language of example and invitation. It will hand a spark to anyone who is willing to tend it and will ask of you only the habit of vigilant kindness. If you choose to enter that space, do so as a keeper, not a spectator. Let it move through your bones and rearrange the small furniture of your heart. Allow the images to press soft questions into rooms that have been numb. When the signal comes, receive it with the humility of someone who knows the cost of attention. And because the work of tending requires the company to consider allowing a small signal to accompany you. Let notifications arrive when new passages are ready so your readiness can be met by fellowship. This is not a call to consumption but an invitation to accompany, a reminder that you need not learn alone. Return now to an ordinary day with the practice you have honed. Keep your hands open and your listening sharp. Move through marketplaces and kitchens with the quiet attention of one who knows how to hold a fragile thing. The body that once announced only trouble now announces the arrival of grace, and you will answer its summons with the practiced generosity of a heart trained in night watch. The corridor ahead remains. The image waits ready to give another key. Go there not to find yourself but to remember what you already carry. Let the next passage complete the lesson that began when the world was still. Rise and let your presence be a place of welcome. The next light is closer than you think. A video will appear at the center of your screen. It continues this summons. Allow it to hold you. If you choose to stay close to this work, subscribe and enable notifications so the next key reaches you. Return when the frame opens again. Stay ready.